stars of animation are shining. It's time to stay tuned. And now, here's your host, Phil Machi.
Welcome back to Stay Tuned. As always, I'm Phil Machi, and I'm so glad you could join me for another behind-the-scenes look into animation creation. Tonight's special guest is Greg Hinde. A musical score composer for animation and beyond, Greg Hinde has also worked as an animation checker for TV series like Batman Beyond, Animaniacs, and Pinky and the Brain, and in the world of animated features over at Disney on films like The Little Mermaid and Oliver and Company. In more recent years, Greg has pursued his career as a composer for a variety of live-action television series and short films. He's here to talk about his time with tunes like The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, Evil Con Carne, and The Wild Thornberrys, all in just a few moments. But first, this. Greg Hinde, welcome to Stay Tuned.
Well, hello there.
Hey. Greg, obviously you're a composer, and so of course I want to get to the music, but before we do, let's get into this animation checker thing.
Oh.
What are you checking? How are you checking it? And perhaps more mysteriously, who checks the checker?
Well, actually, it's in a live action sense, that same job equates to being a technical director. We make sure that we're looking at storyboards, all that other type of stuff, and making sure that when it's actually done in color, that it actually makes sense.
Okay.
It was great because when you became a composer, and I switched over to being a composer, you could tell the directors they were not used to dealing with someone who understood the actual technical side. And they were saying, well, in animation we do things like this, and I'm going, I know that. But how do you know that? I used to be one of you.
So you have that really unique advantage of kind of seeing things from multiple angles. Most composers probably don't have that, right?
Part of it is the gentleman that brought me pretty much into the industry, a gentleman named Drew Newman, who started off with, when I knew him, was like, oh, you do Wild Thornberrys. Well, that's just darn cool. Never really thought about moving more into animation. In fact, I was trying to move out of animation and do more long theme television shows. You've heard scores before in live action where it sounds like the composition is done by animation or like just quick little cuts, and it almost becomes silly.
Yeah.
So the one thing that neither Drew or I did would be playing down to the audience. We always tried to keep high levels. In fact, even doing Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, very often we were just told, this is where it starts and this is where the cue ends. Nowadays, with dealing with, because the company I work with now that I'm actually in production with in India, they just say, you know more about calling this than we do, so there's the episode, so just go off and do it. The difference being is that I'm working with Cartoon Network, they had a time limit. It wasn't, okay, you're getting this amount of money for just do the episode. It was, you're getting this amount of money for this amount of minutes of music, and we don't want to exceed that because we have budget restraints.
Oh, interesting.
And so I would much rather work on a product that was, here's your budget, you go in, this is where we want the music, but if you feel that there's additional music that's needed, then please do so. And what it does is it creates an environment where not every piece of music is this big bombastic piece of music.
Right.
Like somebody sneaking up on someone and you hear the pizzicato strings, which is the typical way of doing things, and if you're doing that and it's met with the big surprise and the big action after that, that's cool. And that's the way it should be. But if you are being paid by, minute or, seconds or whatever it is, they're listening to pizzicato strings going, okay, we're paying you for that. And it's like, yes, you are, because that's part of the story. Composition is not a separate part of the story. It is a supporting role.
You mentioned the grim adventures of Billy and Mandy, and so how did you arrive at blending humor, because that show has a lot of humor, with dark undertones at the same time?
Yeah, when Maxwell Adams came to us and said, this is his direction was absolutely really cut to the quick. It was Empire Strikes Back meets Wendy Carlos.
Interesting.
So we had a lot of synth-based stuff in there, of course, and that's what's the instrumentation.
Yes.
So that was easy. That was great. It's when a director comes to you and says, I don't know what I want.
Yeah, that's not good.
But I can tell you what I don't want. He was not that way.
It sounded like there were some harpsichords in there, or mock harpsichords, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's called the mellotron. You might hear that with bands such as Genesis, ELO, Yes, all these kind of guys. They use that. So one day I added that in there just kind of out of a fluke and put mellotron into the score. That instrument was so unique sounding.
Is it like a synth, that kind of thing?
It is. It's a keyboard.
It's a keyboard. Okay.
It's a keyboard, but instead of playing digital samples, this is pre-digital.
Right.
And so it would play a tape, and the tape would have 3 sections on it, and you could do A, B, and C. And normally, what most people use were the violins. Then they would use the choir and then the flute. So when you'd hear that, you'd go, "Oh, yeah, that's a mellotron." And the response was, "What is that?" "I don't know what that is, but that is so cool sounding." So it started making its way into more and more, and then doing the actual title.
It almost sounds like Bach or Beethoven.
That's kind of cool. No, the rhythm was based off of Marilyn Manson's "Beautiful People."
Oh.
So if you heard that and you went to then that's "Beautiful People."
Oh, I meant the intro to the episodes, like the little
Oh, yeah, Drew came up with that. That was kind of a nice little bit that Drew did.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Because right at the end of it, it has that. That's where I'm getting the classical Beethoven Bach stuff feeling from.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it was kind of neat because I wrote the title. So when it came to what they call the submains, I think Drew was just kind of fumbling around with something and said, how about this right here for the submains? And it was like, oh, that's brilliant. That was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
And so when we did the title, it was one of those kind of situations where I ushered in a lot of guitar. Now, I'm mostly a keyboard player, but play some guitar. So all the guitar stuff that's in it, it's one of these things where somebody says, work that out. Then no problem, I can do that. It just takes a little bit longer. So therefore, guitar really didn't play a prominent instrument within the score. So I would do it every once in a while, and you'll hear it every once in a while. We finished the title, and I thought, going from the title into the episode, it just had that same, there was something about it that just matched and married together very nicely.
Mm-hmm.
I tell you, that was the one thing that people might think that was absolutely incredibly difficult, would be that Drew would take one episode, I would take another episode, and yet somehow we still stayed in the same theme. We kind of kept talking to each other about, what are you doing here? And I've heard composers, and I never want to slam somebody or their work, but very often the cue will start at the right point and end at the right point, but all the hits in between aren't done.
Yeah, that actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask you. So that's a good segue. Composing to picture requires a certain syncopation. How hard is it to find those spaces between spaces where the music can breathe?
One time I was working on a piece of music that I was trying to make sure that every beat was on every step.
Yeah, that would be.
Yeah. And then you have a scene cut where they're not going to go, oh, wait, that footstep is not in the same place it was in the previous scene, even though we've made a cut.
Exactly.
Okay, but the composer's got to do that? No, the composer just establishes the tempo. Then after a bit, if it falls out of sync, you've already established the emotion behind it. If somebody's marching in a militaristic fashion, and you've now established a piece of music that sounds very military. Then you work it into where your very last note might be their last step. Mostly what you do is you can just either remap or slow down the tempo ever so slightly, or depending on what needs to be done. The better way for me to do it is to change meter. So all of a sudden you're going, instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, that's your last step instead of being 1.
Mm-hmm.
And for the audience, to me, that feels natural as opposed to trying to hit every step.
How much of that gets manipulated by editors after the fact, when you were under the impression that you wrote music to be a specific, pairing up to picture?
Zero, because you are so on frame.
So the music kind of happens towards the end then?
It is one of the end things. When I send stuff in, I give them first frame of picture. It used to be different because that was why the 2-pop was very much so necessary.
2-pop.
Yeah, you see the da-da, da-da, and then 2. You hear that?
Oh, the countdown thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's an editing tool.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about Tupac Shakur for a minute. I was wondering what was going on.
Yeah.
The Tupac. I was like, the Tupac, what's going on with this?
There's a joke in there somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure there is. I don't know what it is because that's not my musical forte. But I'm like, well, this took a turn I wasn't expecting.
Yes. Go look up your musical dictionary and Tupac. Yeah. Never mind.
Anyways, you were saying that, so when the 2-pop would pop up.
Yeah, that was instrumental because that was where you knew that you were 2 seconds for the first frame of picture.
Okay, where you're trying to sync up to time.
Exactly. And so from that standpoint, that was what was used then. And so you always made sure that your first frame was at 2 seconds before first frame of picture, giving you just some sort of roll in. But now it's so cool because technologically, they just send you a picture and then you just kind of go, okay, this is where your picture starts. This is where my picture starts.
Oh, that's helpful.
So much easier.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you end up just sending them the file. And the big difference between working in the States, when you did the music, somebody else did the sound effects.
Ah.
And you worked separate from each other. So very often you weren't necessarily working as in concert together.
Okay.
They were doing the sound effects. And I can tell you 2 examples on Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. One was Evil Concarne. And I actually had to say something to the editor because there's this gorilla coming up behind one of our main characters. And they're in an air shaft. And you hear this really scary bit of music that occurs. Then the main character realizes something's behind her. So she turns, but the gorilla gets out of the way. So following the story, the music is actually conveying both the scariness, the pending something's about to get you.
Right.
And then Dr. Ghastly was the character's name. She turned and the gorilla zips off screen. Well, the final product, all you could hear was them clambering through the air duct. Mm-hmm. So it was just like a bang, shebang, 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 shebang. She stopped, turned, shebang, shebang, shebang. And I'm thinking, okay, you can't even hear the music. Or they're fighting each other.
So in that case, maybe don't have music at all?
No, that's the difference now because then he had to go back in and do some remixing.
Oh, okay.
I think it was Billy and Mandy show. Drew did a really nice score to what sounded like a tornado that was wiping everything out. And the final product came back and all you could hear was just the wind.
Oh, no.
And it was like, so I know that we kind of went back in and said, come on, guys. The point being is that because of the speed of the show being done, very often you're just throwing anything together or you're making sure at least the sound effects, or in our case, the music all worked correctly.
Yeah, you don't want it to become wallpaper.
Yeah, but the problem is that we weren't necessarily working together. So when we went to mixing stage, that was where we had to make sure that they all worked together. Now, really neat thing that I've been enjoying working with the Indian company is I do both the music and sound effects.
Oh, that's great.
So they work really well together.
Okay, that's very helpful. I mean, that gives you more chance to reduce some of that miscommunication potential.
Yeah, kind of like for example, an explosion goes off, and to me, you can handle it 2 different ways. You can either have the music build up and hit along with the explosion, or you can have the music kind of taper down to quiet, and then the boom sound effect.
Right.
And both are really effective.
Nice.
But since I control both, I get to make that determination.
I like that. That's a really good position to be in.
Yeah.
More music with Greg Hinde after this. Exploiting those moments of the in-between that we were talking about, not the theme song, not the end credits. Do you find that gives you freedom to write more memorable themes, or is it really just a trap to distract from all the visuals?
At the end of the day, I have to do something that I enjoy, that I can look back and say, that worked. The biggest trap that I found is not to get locked into doing the same thing over and over. Especially if you're dealing with, when somebody says, well, you need this done now. I found myself into a situation where the same lead-in, but within that middle section, you want to be able to do things that still carry the storyline. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I imagine it's incredibly challenging, though, because you're trying to tell a story, but you don't want to get in the way of the visual narrative.
Dialogue is key, no matter what. Dialogue is key. If you go over the top of dialogue, bad composer. That would be like a supporting actor.
Right.
And you have somebody like the key person that people, I love movies when he's in it,
right,
kind of thing. They never go, I love movies what's that supporting actor's name?
Right.
It never happens that way. So the thing is that you have to give way to that. And you look at composition as a supporting role. And it does support the story, it supports the characters, but you stay out of dialogue. So imagine having a supporting actor jump in front of the lead actor during a love scene. Hey, Bob, what's going on?
Right.
Not appropriate.
Which could be funny in its own right, but you're right. It would be distracting.
I do it all the time.
I'm sure you do. That's interesting.
It's the idea that, say, for example, you hear like a quartet singing, and they're all really close together, and they sound nice together, but you can't differentiate between the parts. Spread them out. Suddenly it's like, there's the baritone section over. That's the guy who sings. Yeah, what a cool part. You can actually hear that individual just by spreading them out.
Interesting.
But that's what you do from a technical side of composition. You keep that center area clear. So even if you get into a place where it's a big emotional, you hear the violins swelling, and then over here you can hear the French horns now carrying their part. Now the melody is being done by the string section again, but you keep that open area and you can hear all the dialogue. And engineers just kind of go, thank you for doing that, because we don't have to pull the music down. It's been moved out of the way, creating a gap for the dialogue.
Oh, that's good. But that's up to who, though? That isn't up to the composer, is it?
That's it, or my engineer, my own engineer.
If you don't want to put music there, you can just tell them, guys, we shouldn't be putting music over there, right?
Keep that area clear. So if you have flutes that would be closer to the center, don't put them in the center.
So that means you have to have a real good relationship with your sound mixer and your editor. And
well, once it's done, once it leaves here, it very few times that you get something coming back saying, hey, could you move that out of the way? We've already done that before.
Right. In the creative process, you've made sure that we're only going to put content within the confines of these different points, not during these other points where there's dialogue.
Right. I mean, and you hear that a lot with animation. Now, see, that's the cool thing about the show that I'm working on now.
Yeah, let's talk about that. What's the name of it again?
It's called Beano and Pino. And what it is a bear and a penguin there up in the North Pole. And if you take that environment and then correlate it to the old Tom and Jerry. Yeah, the old ones from the 30s. And you put those two together, that's pretty much the show.
Okay.
And the cool thing is that because they don't have the dialogue. So
very cool.
So when
for a composer, it's got to be a playground.
Oh, it's incredible but they still make sounds. They still have a little bit of do that kind of stuff.
Sure.
If somebody gets irritated.
But I imagine that translates very well to other countries, because now you're not dealing with any kind of actual dialogue issues.
Exactly.
See, that's what's been really brilliant about, I don't know if you've watched the more modern Mickey Mouse cartoon shorts.
Yes.
But when they do the international ones, whatever the country they're featuring, they give the characters a few key words in that language. But it's so precise and it's so easy to figure out based on context that it translates to any language.
Right. Somebody getting hit in the head with a pan.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's PC anymore.
Well, not as easily as it used to be able to be done.
I haven't seen a good anvil hit in a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. I think Animaniacs is probably the last time I saw something like that.
I think the biggest thing is recognizing why animation does certain things. And the one thing I don't ever like doing, for example, you get with a bunch of musicians, it's like everybody wants to talk, hey man, like what kind of keyboard are you like using? And like, and you're like going, oh gosh, please, let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
That's what I don't want to do. I don't want to get into conversations about stuff that I deal with all day.
So this interview is going very well for you then.
Oh, it's cool, man. So that's the whole point. You get into stuff. I understand what you're saying. It's nice to kind of talk to somebody about what you do, and it becomes almost automatic.
Yeah, you don't want to go into autopilot.
Yeah, and it also tells you that, or it tells me when I'm even bringing things up that I don't often talk about, why I do certain things. Having a conversation with you kind of affirms, well, that's why I do it. And I remember why I do it now. It's just,
oh, well, that's good.
Yeah. So it is greatly appreciated.
Yeah, it's nice to take a step back sometimes and realize, oh, there's a method to the madness.
Yes.
Yeah.
I remember one of the coolest things that happened when working on Wild Thornberrys, because I took over when I had good guidance from Drew Newman, who was the original composer for Wild Thornberrys. But when they started doing the movie, he was allocated more over to doing the movie, and I was sectioned out to finish up the final season. And there's this one point where the characters, the mom and dad, are considering sending their daughter to school, and she has to leave them. So they're going to put her in school in England. And at one point, they're talking about all the things that would be good for her. And this is why we need to do this. And she needs to go and get more foundation. And, and you could tell the more they said this, they're going to miss her terribly.
Mm-hmm.
It was building up, and then it just all came down to a single oboe line, just holding the note. And it just dissipated right before the mom said, but I'm going to miss her. And it was just like, oh. And that's the thing about all this new technology, still comes down to that single note. And I remember looking over the director, and he's like, okay, that was good. Just next to, and that to me was all the tech stuff that you do. If you don't have the ability to act it or even tell the story, then I'm going to have a benefit over you.
Right. Well, that right there is a good summation of, I think, where the magic of animation is fully realized. When all of the best people come together playing at their A game, and all those different parts become one, beautiful film or story, it has the ability to make people moved.
And don't you love that?
I do. That's why we're here. That's why this show exists. That's why, it's why I have committed most of my life at this point, and I don't see me stopping anytime soon, both in creating my own work, but also in appreciating the works of so many other people.
Right.
This is what I love hearing, is when someone can talk about how their experience, even while they were in the production of something, seeing behind the curtain of The Wizard of Oz, and yet the work was so powerful that it caused them to stop dead in their tracks and go, holy cow, we have something here.
No, because what you're saying there is absolutely the crux of why I do what I do. I do it to be part of storytelling. Being a storyteller, being something that you can conjure up emotions that so many people never experience in their own actual life except through television or film.
Sure.
Or music itself, just by itself, the lyric. Without that, My gosh, I think most of us would live a pretty mundane life.
Yeah, probably.
I think we're part of an industry that's where most people still understand relationships.
I think that's very true. I think we teach through storytelling. That's very, very true. Culturally speaking, we do that. I think we inform each other of how we all expect to be treated in the world through our stories.
Through our stories. Yeah.
One last musical question for you.
Yes.
Themes for characters, like the theme for Superman, for example. People don't really compose in that way as much because it's very on the nose. It's very much the music is like becoming the star.
Right.
That trend has sort of gone away. Have you had to shift your way of composing because people are saying, hey, less is more now?
Budget-wise, what you do, and this will make sense in a second, you have to do temp scores.
Right.
And then people fall in love with those temp scores. And then when the composition comes in, somebody says, well, that's not how it goes. So often now the temp scores are being done by MIDI mock-up rather than orchestra. A MIDI mock-up can be something that somebody can say, okay, I understand where you're going with this. This will work great. We don't have to worry about it once we move it into orchestral side, that we don't have to worry about retakes. They know what they're going to be getting. One of the biggest things about MIDI mock-ups is very often you fall into a pattern of, rather than having a chase scene or a flying scene that you might have found in the 80s, 90s, now to sell it correctly with MIDI mock-ups, we have to use drums. So you put in these big bombastic drums, and now all of a sudden that's what people get used to hearing, only because you see what I'm talking about? Because
I
so
do.
often, yeah, if you try to do it with the way an orchestra would do it back in the 70s, 80s, then suddenly you've worked extremely hard on something that somebody may go, well, it doesn't sound like real violins, or it's something about it's just not right.
So you're saying a lot of the trend of music has gone because people have gotten used to the temp scores made with a MIDI mock-up?
Exactly.
Really? That's interesting. But I've noticed that percussiveness is kind of taking over, and that's interesting that you're saying that that's where that came from.
It takes a lot of work in a MIDI mock-up setup to really come with a really good string orchestra doing that. But I can do the same thing with just, doing that type of stuff. Then suddenly, oh, that's big and sounds great. Wow, now I know exactly where you're going with this. And that becomes the means to an end.
That's the new normal.
That's the new normal. And
how interesting.
It sounds cool. I like it. And I like how things do move.
Yeah.
But the problem is now, if you wanted to do something that was not that way, I was thinking something that had more to do with drums, a director might say.
Right.
That score for, where everybody's running and you hear these big drums. Yeah, I was thinking more like that.
But they were only thinking that because that was what was suggested to them with the original mock-up.
Exactly.
Well, that's really uninspiring.
It is.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That's good to know.
I don't mean to make your day not.
No, it's not. Well, I mean, it actually makes a lot of sense. I can't say that I have a problem with it. It's just not where I thought that was going, but that's really interesting.
And like I said, it comes back down to a budget. How many times? I mean, an orchestra.
An orchestra, sure.
You know.
Well, Greg, this has been very, very interesting, and I mean, in ways I don't know that I expected, and that's a good thing because I like to learn new things about the processes that I feel like most of us aren't privy to. That's really the goal behind this whole thing, is to really kind of understand what is happening to make an animated film or television show come into existence. So thank you for being here doing that.
Phil, it has been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I should ask before we go, do you have a place where people can buy your scores or support your music that way?
Just watch the shows.
Watch the shows.
Yeah, just watch. It's the delightful thing about the new show is that it's meant for little kids. And
okay.
I love the fact that they are being entertained. But I do have a website, which is gregoryhinde.com, and the other one is gregoryhindemusic.com.
Okay.
And that was the logistics side, and I think they're both the same site, I hope.
Yeah, that will go. So gregoryhinde.com and watch the shows.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you, Greg. I wish you all the best going forward.
You as well. Thank you.
That is all the time we have for this episode. Thank you so much for listening in at home. Special thanks go out to Greg Hinde for joining me here on Stay Tuned. If you haven't already, be sure to go behind the podcast by visiting patreon.com/Phil Machi. Supporting the show there helps me grow and develop each and every episode. There are also some cool rewards in it for you, too. If you'd like to see some of my visual art, check out my original comic books at retailsunshine.com, and be sure to say hi to me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook under the handles of both Retail Sunshine and Phil Machi. And remember to join the amazing Stay Tuned community on Facebook for free daily news from the world of all things animated and to chat with other fans of this podcast. Join for free now at facebook.com/groups/Stay Tuners. I've been Phil Machi, you've been a wonderful audience, and until next time, keep those eyeballs peeled, those ears open, and be sure to stay tuned.